The night I discovered the shop, rain had slicked the streets in silver and blurred the reflections of late closing cafes. I was walking home from the library, hugging an empty canvas tote as though it held something, except really, I was hugging the weight of a day spent with no one to talk to. I'd moved to the city 6 months earlier, and the city had not yet noticed. When my umbrella finally collapsed under an obstinate gust, I ducked into the first lit doorway I saw. The bell tinkled like a polite question, and the scent that greeted me was warm wax and citron. A wooden placard above the threshold read, "Burnt into the grain. Wax and wane, stories in every flame." Dripping on the doormat, I took in shelves stacked to the ceiling with candles of every imaginable color. Some were poured into sea green jars, others wrapped in lace, still others carved into the shapes of mythic animals. A single flame on the counter burned inside a copper bowl, though no wick was visible. Instead of rising straight, the flame folded back on itself, darting quick as a hummingbird. Each sudden tuck projected shadows that behaved like actors. One moment a tiny figure ran, the next a boat tilted on rough water, yet the walls held no screens, only blank plaster. "First time visiting?" a voice asked. The shopkeeper appeared from behind a velvet curtain. She was neither old nor young, with walnut-ducked hair woven into a braid that shone like river stones. "I'm Marisol. You look as though the rain has been lecturing you." I managed a grin. My umbrella surrendered. She handed me a towel that smelled faintly of lavender. While I dried my hair, she watched me with the patient curiosity of someone who keeps rare clocks and listens for their particular ticks. "You may browse," she said, gesturing toward the shelves, "but a word of warning, these candles are choosy. They decide who carries them out." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean they refuse to be sold?" "Not exactly." Marisol walked over to a row of squat cobalt tins. She opened one and let me peer inside. Instead of a wick, there lay a pinch of something that could have been sea glass, ground nearly to dust. "The flame lives inside already. It simply waits for the right kindling. Your breath, for instance. Light it, and it will tell you a story you need. When its tale is finished, it will extinguish itself." Some customers bring theirs back for refills, some never part with the stub. I thought she was performing a well-rehearsed script, the kind of whimsical patter boutique owners employ to charge triple. Yet my soaked clothes made me reckless, and the restless flame in the copper bowl did look undeniably alive. "What if I don't understand the story?" I asked. "You will," she said with unsettling certainty. On my first pass around the shop, nothing occurred. Then, at the end of a narrow hallway of pillars, I felt a vibration in the air, delicate as the prickle before static shocks. A thin taper in a milk-white bottle seemed to warm as I neared it. Its wax swirled in paler and darker threads like two kinds of moonlight. No label declared a scent. When I wrapped my fingers around the bottle's neck, a thrum traveled into my palm, as though the glass had a heartbeat. Marisol, watching, nodded approval. "That one," she said, ringing it up. "3 refills included in the price. Welcome to the Narrative League." I carried the candle home, cradled inside my raincoat. My apartment, though small, offered a blank wall above the couch. I set the bottle on the coffee table, turned off every other lamp, and, remembering Marisol's instruction, breathed steadily upon the unlit wick. To my shock, a flame blinked awake, no match required. It bloomed pale gold, nearly white at its center, shadows spidered outward, fast as time-lapse clouds, until the opposite wall wasn't a wall anymore, but a moving canvas. First came a boy and a girl playing marbles in dusty summer grass. The boy's elbows were scabbed, his sneakers unlaced. The girl squinted against light, her ponytail crooked. Neither had a face I recognized, yet the scene pricked some buried nostalgia. Next, the boy grew older, hunched over a school lunch tray, alone while others laughed elsewhere. The girl, too, aged, now reading in a window seat that looked suspiciously like the third-floor alcove of the downtown cafe, where I sometimes hid on Fridays. Her book trembled in her hands, and I could tell, even in silhouette, that she was pressing back tears she hoped no one would see. A shiver went through me. The flame had shown 2 different people marooned by loneliness, a boy who resembled my childhood and a woman whose present might be 5 blocks away. When the flame dwindled, the final image remained. The cafe's sign in the window and 2 empty chairs pulled to the same table. Invitation stark as chalk. I barely slept. Morning came, ribboned with leftover questions, and yet I knew precisely what the candle wanted. By noon, I was in the cafe, pretending to read while scanning the crowd. I'd almost talked myself into leaving when a ponytailed woman bumped her tray, scattering napkins. Instinct propelled me forward. Here, let me, I said, and handed her the runaway napkins. Up close, I recognized her silhouette, the sharp cheekbones, the determined line of her brow. She smiled, grateful and sheepish at once. I'm Elena, she said. We fell easily into conversation about favorite authors and the best pastries to bribe rainy moods. I told her eventually about a strange candle, but not the details. She was intrigued, but our drinks emptied and work called her away. We exchanged numbers. Outside, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked taller, as if conversation itself had lengthened me. That night, I lit the candle again. Its wick, though shortened, sparked eagerly. Now the shadows painted the cafe we'd just left. Alina sat at a table, and beside her a third chair waited. Into the room strolled a man holding a guitar case plastered with bumper stickers. Into the room strolled a man, holding a guitar case plastered with bumper stickers. He set the case on the floor, opened it, and strummed a chord whose vibrations rippled across the plaster wall like waves. Elena and I leaned toward the music. Then the guitarist's silhouette burned brighter than the rest until everything dissolved in ash-grey smoke. The flame puffed out. I texted Elena, "Do you like live music?" She answered, "My favorite language." So Friday we met for an open mic night advertised by a torn flyer taped to a lamppost, the same stylized guitar silhouette from my wall. The guitarist, whose name was Theo, performed an original song called Paper Moons. His voice lilted between rough and honey. Afterward, we bought him a drink. He shrugged, shy around compliments, until Elena teased him into laughter. 3 strangers returned home that night, less strange. Refilling the candle became a ritual. Each visit to Wax and Wayne felt like entering a book whose chapters rearranged depending on who turned the page. Marisol welcomed us without surprise, as though she had seen our trio forming in the flames long before we arrived. She set out jars of colored sands, amethyst, copper, peridot for us to choose the next refill. Different grains, different tales, she explained. Elena selected copper, Theo peridot, and I stuck with moonwhite. We joked about tasting flights of stories. Word spread. A teenager named Javi wandered in one afternoon, hoodie up despite midsummer heat. He'd heard from a gaming friend about the candle shop that ships you friends like DLC. Marisol gave him a tiny black votive which smoked rather than glowed. Its shadows showed an arcade tournament and later, a park bench at dusk where 4 silhouettes sat passing a handheld console, laughing so hard they risked dropping it. The following Saturday, Javi used the torn edge of his tournament sign-up sheet to jot directions to the park and found us already there, having set up a picnic because my candle had suggested both bread and strawberries. The picnic cloth and its flickering scene looked suspiciously like the one Elena owned. Soon gatherings swelled. Mrs. Park, a retired botanist whose husband had died last year, received a lavender pillar that projected blooming night garden walls. She brought cuttings of moonflowers to our meetups. A baker named Noor, living above her closed storefront, received a vanilla bean candle whose first story was simply a line of customers outside her door. Theo volunteered to play lunchtime sets at her grand reopening. Elena designed the menu chalkboards, and we all showed up early to taste Hesta Claire's. Within 2 months, Wax and Wayne had seeded a constellation of friendships that kept colliding, fusing, spinning off new sparks. Each new flame, new wall, the stories overlapped like transparencies until no one could recall who had arrived first. One humid August evening, Marisol invited the entire tangle of us to a private event after closing hours. She led us through the velvet curtain into a long back chamber whose walls were mirror black stone. Countless niches held unlit candles. Above, narrow skylights showed nothing but deepening blue. Tonight, she announced, the flames will choose not only individual tales but a shared one. Think of it as a choir instead of solos. We scattered cushions on the floor. Marisol carried in a single unadorned sphere of wax the size of a melon and placed it upon a pedestal. Instead of a wick, 12 slender channels spiraled from its center, each ending in a throat-wide opening. Breathe together, she instructed. So we inhaled, a ragged cord of lungs, and exhaled onto the sphere. Light erupted simultaneously from the 12 mouths, weaving a braided flame that floated inches above the wax like a living crown. Shadows leapt onto the walls, yet the mirrors refused to show us ourselves. They showed versions of us. A projection of Javi adjusted a tie beside Noor wearing a chef's coat. They shook hands with a downtown property manager whose signature glowed gold on a lease form. Another projection had Theo playing on a small stage while couples danced under strings of lanterns stamped with Mrs. Park's favorite night bloom patterns. Elena chalked constellation names on a board. I stood at a podium reading something that made the crowd nod. Our mirrored selves looked older, more certain. The images flickered one over another faster. Or teaching children to knead dough, Mrs. Park planting rooftop herbs, Javi hosting tournaments that doubled as food drive fundraisers. All these possible futures kaleidoscoped, dizzying but coherent. Then the through line was togetherness. Then the flame stuttered and gathered itself into a single, towering column. From its heart burst a quick blaze, bright enough to force us to shield our eyes. When the light gentled, the mirrors displayed only text, as if surfacing subtitles. Find the room that stands empty and fill it. The column divided into 12 separate flames, each twirled toward the niche that matched our personal candle's color of wax. A puff, and darkness returned. We sat in silence, oxygen humming in our ears. Eventually, Mrs. Park spoke. I think it means the old community center on Weaver Street. The city closed it last year. Elena added, "It's been empty ever since. I've walked by, the windows are dusty." Theo strummed an absent chord on his knee, a habit when he thought. Stages, kitchens, classrooms, everything we'd need. The plan shaped itself quicker than logic usually permits. The next morning, we met outside the boarded-up double doors of the community center, armed with cleaning supplies and a petition for temporary occupation. Volunteers drifted over, curious, some guided by their own recent candle visions, some because local rumor is the oldest trail of breadcrumbs. Within a week, we had keys on loan, city approval for a 90-day pilot, and a schedule of events. Free bread baking on Mondays, night garden plantings on Tuesdays, open mic Wednesdays, board game marathons on Fridays, and Saturday evening story circles where candle jars perch safely in wall sconces, flames dancing like excited narrators. People arrived alone and left exchanging phone numbers. Widow met college freshman, insomniac met dawn jogger. Even the formerly estranged siblings who ran the hardware store found themselves painting the same corridor and forgiving each other with wordless nods. The center hummed the way a great beast hums when it realizes its heart is huge. Late one evening, after locking up, I walked past Wax and Wayne and saw Marisol inside, counting inventory. She waved me in. I held up my now stub-small moon-white candle. I think it's empty. She inspected the stub, pressed a thumb against the cooled wax, and smiled. It's not empty, it's fulfilled. Flames end, but stories keep going. She motioned toward a shelf labeled Returned Stubs. Each sat inside a tiny alcove like a tooth in a jaw of memories. Some had labels, friendship forged, grief eased, solitude traded for song. What happens to them now? I asked. Wax remembers, Marisol said. Someday someone will need the memories. We'll melt the stubs into new candles, new chances. Stories are reusable energy. I thanked her and stepped into the street. The rain had eased to a mist that seemed less like sadness and more like the breath of something refreshing the air. Weaver Street's lamplights glowed ahead, and beyond them, the community center's windows were bright. Silhouettes moving inside Alina, pinning a poster, Tio tuning strings, Nor handing Mrs. Park a steaming mug, Javi high-fiving a child clutching a controller. Their shadows danced long across the sidewalk, and for a heartbeat, I saw the candle's first projection, overlaid on reality, real and reflection indistinguishable. I walked toward the doors, no longer carrying a tote full of nothing, no longer waiting for the city to notice. The city was in there, pouring batter, tuning guitars, pruning vines, pressing play, people making rooms warm with story. I realized the flame's final lesson. Friendship is not the end of loneliness, but the craft of lighting someone else's wick when their matchbox is empty. The wax returns, soft enough to reshape. The flame renews, fierce enough to guide. And the walls, once blank, now flicker with so many stories they overlap into a single brilliant mural, one you can step into, hand extended, ready to meet whoever's silhouette emerges next.